It is a happy Saturday. Happy Saturday
Happy
afternoon.
Saturday.
we were having an interesting few things came up this week, and so we wanted to talk about the kind of the essence of communication, and especially kind of communication with children. Steve was working with someone, and I got a question this week too about certain ways of communicating with kids. If you want kids to know something, or if you want to communicate with someone, and this kind of works really with everyone that you are communicating with, but it's really impactful for children for you to be aware of the communication that you're using to connect with them. Especially if you're trying to teach them something, if you want them to adopt a certain belief or value, and you have like plans for your kids, there's a better way to do it than the way that most people do it.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things for me is that understanding that when you're talking to children, you're not really talking to children, whether they're your children, someone else's children, whether you're talking to an individual who is a child. And that, recognizing that for me is one of the tremendous kind of shifts. Now, there's some people who would say, you know what, he doesn't have a kid, he doesn't know what he's talking about, I'm not going to listen to him. And if you don't want to listen to me, you just don't have to. I mean, there's no way to justify that, right? But this is just kind of a perspective shift on this whole thing that you might find useful. And so we're not really telling you how you ought to talk to your kids. It's just a different way of thinking about things. And I know personally, I mean, I have very distinct recollections from when I was a child, and I remember very clearly experiencing myself primarily as an individual point of consciousness with individual thoughts and perspectives and views and desires and beliefs and wants and all this different stuff, different priorities, different intentions. And I remember being pretty frustrated when I was being communicated to primarily as a child. And it's almost as if there's these different levels of communication. And so when Melissa and I are talking to each other, I always try to have the primary level of communication be individual to individual. I don't like for the primary level of communication to be man to woman, or guy to girl, or boyfriend to girlfriend, because that's just not
Coach
primarily. Oh yeah.
Patient to therapist.
Well, but that's true too when it comes to like me when I'm actually working with like actual clients. Is that yeah, sure. There's the coach, there's the client, there's the guide, there's the whatever. But fundamentally, that kind of frames the context. But the essence of what's going on between us is an exchange of communication between individuals, and that's always true. And so much of the difficulty that I see manifest in communication, the miscommunication, the difficulty communication, the failure to communicate at all, comes from people being entranced by some secondary or tertiary aspect of communication. So they miss the fact that it's one individual with an experience of what it is like to be them, communicating with another individual who has their own experience of what it's like to be them. And when we become disconnected by that reality, that pattern level truth, because we become so fixated on, so entranced by the idiosyncratic specifics. So if I am an individual who experiences myself as a guy, I'm a male, and I'm talking to another individual who experiences herself as a female, and I've got all these ideas and all this baggage and all this stuff going on about what females are like and how they think and how reasonable they are and how variable their reasonableness is and all that stuff. I'm going to infuse that into my communication, and there will be mistakes, there will be misunderstandings, there will be things that will come up because I'm forgetting that first and foremost I'm talking to an individual. I'm talking to an individual point of consciousness. There will be problems that will come up that wouldn't come up if I actually remembered to whom I was really speaking. And that's just such a valuable thing because it really frees us to respond not to our conceptualization of reality, but to the actual reality that's in front of us. Not to our ideas about people, but to the actual reality of the person who's in front of us right now in that moment. How much of the news, and you see all this kind of racial stuff, and you see, those conflicts between men and women, or between rich people and poor people, or the middle class and the upper class, and all this different stuff. We come to really identify so much with these identities that we have created that we lose our ability to interface with people on an individual level. That's the reason that you can see so much acrimony in the news, so much division, so much negativity. And yet if you go out and walk down the street, in all likelihood, the people that you encounter, you're going to have no difficulty whatsoever interacting with those people. Because when we're just walking down the street and living our daily lives, for the most part, for most people, we actually exchange communication and interaction at the level of the individual. individual. Individual guy, oh, hey, individual guy, how's it going, you know? And then we both go home to our separate homes and we watch TV and we flip into our identities. And, oh, they're doing this, and oh, they're riding over here, and oh, look, they're doing terrible stuff this way that I don't approve of. And we kind of associate into those different things. And I think the same thing is true very often in the patterns that we engage in with children, with our children, with other people's children, with whatever. And so I was talking to this person, I was saying, like, first of all, the basic pattern to just begin to activate within yourself is an awareness that when you're talking to your child, whether the child's 2 years old, or 3 years old, or 8 years old, or 12 years old, or 15, 16, 17, 20, 25, 30, remember, you're talking to an individual point of consciousness, that got individual aspirations, that has a life experience that you don't understand. You might think you understand it. You might think you know about what the reality of their childhood is or their personal history is, but the reality is you don't know about their perception of it. You might know about what they tell you about their perception of it, about what they communicate to you, but you don't know about what they don't tell you, what they don't communicate to you. You don't know about the motivations that are really driving them, and you don't know about the specific individual experiences of reality that inspire within them those motivations and desires. And so when you just kind of keep that in mind, and really you kind of watch the unfoldment, that's a big thing too. When you recognize and you respect the fact that what we're interacting with here are these other individuals, you really kind of allow yourself, you place yourself in a position where it's possible for you to accept the fact that they are as they are in a given moment in time, that they're behaving as they're behaving, they're thinking as they're thinking, they're feeling as they're feeling, they're doing all this different stuff. Now, and here's one thing too, and this is, I'm not like a ultra permissive parenting teacher. Like, I don't say that, like, no matter what your kids do, you should never do anything to motivate them to do something different. But there is a level at which your child has a right to do whatever they want to do. Now, of course, you've got a right as the parent to assert a little authority and say, listen, individual, here's the nature of our relationship here. I'm responsible for you and this, that, and the other thing. And so when you do that, let me just tell you what's going to happen. That's totally fine. But when you do those things, when you do your parenting, when you exert your parental authority with an awareness that it's not because they didn't have a right to do what they did, it's because they had a right to do what they did, and they're going to get something they're going to get a response from their reality, which includes you. It fundamentally shifts things. It takes it from you really inside yourself feeling it was wrong that what happened there, that behavior that they did, that tantrum, that lie, that whatever, it's fundamentally a mistake that happened, versus they're just doing them. They're free to do whatever they want to do, and I'm free as an individual who happens to be their parent to respond to that in the best way that I can figure out. And the best way you can figure out will be so much better when you recognize that that's what you're doing, that you aren't in that impossible position of trying to make something that happened not have happened, or to punish something out of existence. It's just, listen, hey, it's the way it is.
Yeah, and for me, the thing that's just so interesting is the thing I posted this morning was about colds, and where colds come from is you having a situation that stinks, and something you just perceive it and you're like, this sucks, this stinks, this situation is not what I want it to be. And how frequently do children experience this? And the person asked, I've got a child, and this child has like chronic stuffy nose and is having congestion, and that's a result of a chronic relapse into these this stinks conflicts. And she was curious about, how do you really, help a child to see what kind of conflicts they're having. And then she made a really great comment, which was, I imagine that school would be a place where a lot of conflicts happen. I mean, absolutely. And that's the thing, remembering that your child is an individual experiencing the world, and the way that their body is responding to what they're exposed to and what their perception of their world is. And so, it could be just the mere fact of going to school. A kid could think that stinks, something that happens at school, a way that they feel, somebody looks at, there are so many opportunities. And so that's where, as a family, when you're becoming aware of this like perceptual alchemy and the ability that everybody has in the family to see the world in a unique way, and how that unique way influences how that unique individual's physiology is responding to what's going on. It's like, oh wow, this is so, and this family dynamic thing is really interesting. And when you think about contagion among a family, like, oh, well, I hope so-and-so doesn't get sick because so-and-so's sick, and then we'll all get sick. And it's not germs that are the contagion. It's these thoughts. It's these perceptions. It's of this stinks. Everybody in the family can't swallow that, Aunt so-and-so is coming over, because we hate when Aunt so-and-so comes over. So everybody, is hacking and coughing and sneezing because they think the situation stinks and they can't swallow it. And when you start to really just see this German new medicine work at play in your life, you're like, whoa, it's the coolest stuff, because you know that you can always make a connection to a situation, a circumstance that you're like, yeah, I can see that now. But getting a child to see that and getting a child to experience, and it's really going to come by modeling, because telling them, oh, stop thinking that stinks because that's causing you to have a stuffed up nose, that's not really going to work. And so the reason that the child perceives things in the way that they do, some of it is just innate to that child, and they're kind of who they are and how they see the world, but a lot of it and how they assign meaning to things in their world and how they perceive came from how you perceive your world. And so when you start to model and maybe have these conversations, when you, instead of this explicit, here, let's talk about this, honey, let's sit down and have a conversation, because nobody likes that. That's the most uncomfortable thing. I hated that as a kid. Any kind of explicit talks about something, just the creepy, grossy vibes. No thanks. Let's just not talk about this and pretend that we did, that kind of thing. And so it's more implicit. It's more like something that is modeled in conversation and is a shift in the way the whole family is going to start viewing things. It's sometimes, I think you'd be able to give a good example.
Okay, so the basic idea here is how this is basically kind of communication theory.
Yeah, Rhonda, isn't that's
and one of the things about that, hey Rhonda, one of the things about that is this idea that now as a parent, you can probably relate to this. You sit down and there's something that you really feel it's important that your child understand or that they know. There's something that you just need to communicate to them, right? That let's say they've had a tough time at school and they come home, they're kind of upset, and it hurts you so badly to see them suffering as your child, and you just want to kind of come at them and just love on them and make all the problems go away. You have to understand though that they're not just your child, they're not just an inanimate kind of component of your experience, that they're the center of their own experience, and that you're kind of just out there in their reality, that they're experiencing you kind of as something that's out here in the same way that they experience whatever's upsetting them at school. And so when you come at them and you start trying to basically make them feel better, they're not just responding to your intentions, they're responding to what your intentions seems to say about them based on their assessment of what's going on. No one, or a lot of kids don't want to be, a lot of people don't want to be in the situation or the type of person that requires a sweet and kindly other person to come help them feel better. And so if the child kind of pushes back against you, if they don't seem like they can really assimilate that, it's because we forget, as kind of the centers of our own experiential universe, we forget that other people experience us as other. And so if Melissa's having a problem, and she's kind of venting to me and telling me about this problem, and I swoop in guns blazing with all my solutions about how to fix it, and she doesn't respond well to that, I'm going to be maybe a little bit miffed about that. I'm like, what's your problem here? You got a problem here? I got a perfect pattern solution that I've been working on, and it just so happens that I got it right here for you. I forget that she's experiencing me as a part of reality that's coming in at her. I'm not just a pure transmission of pattern. She is her experiential center in the same way that I'm my experiential center. And if I'm coming at you in a way that's intrusive, that there's this whole ecological context to communication that's really important. And so recognizing not just what's communicated explicitly, but recognizing also implicitly what is the context in which this thing is being communicated. What does that add to the communication? Because the context in which a communication occurs is itself a component of that communication, right? And so if you, if you have recently been dealing with some kind of insecurity and you've indicated to me that you're insecure about this thing, and the next day I communicate to you a purely complimentary observation about the way that you look, it's kind of important that I understand that an aspect of my communication is not just what I'm saying, but the temporal proximity that my saying it has to you telling me, basically, I'm insecure about the way that I look. And so if you don't respond well to that, I'm going to say, what's your problem? You said you did, but I'm not realizing that the fact that I'm communicating when I am the way I am is a part of my communication, and recognizing that those contextual things are picked up. And I think the first thing is recognizing that so that you don't kind of shoot yourself in the foot with the implied aspects of your communications with your children or or with whoever. The other thing, though, is recognizing and generalizing this pattern, which is that the implied elements of communication are as powerful, if not more powerful, than the things that you explicitly say. Now, if you set, little Timmy down, and you say, okay, Timmy, let me tell you a thing or two about German new medicine. Timmy's not going to say, oh boy, here's an opportunity to enrich the experience of what it's like to be me. Timmy's going to say, oh shit, here she goes. Let me see what I can do to really. What is she wanting from me? What behavior? Because kids are because we teach them to be this way. We teach children to be so acute and sensitive in their sensory acuity, their ability to pick up on the kind of behaviors that we're getting at, wanting them to do, so that they can just shortcut to appeasing us with that behavior, so they can go back to play video games or go back to play Legos or just be left alone. Because kids don't like to be sat down. No one likes to be sat down and talked to. I mean, you don't like to be sat down and talked to by your significant other, by your boss, certainly not by anybody who's an authority figure for the most part. And so you got to understand that no matter what your relationship with your kids, if you're sitting them down to tell them things that are important, they're not experiencing the transmission of potentially life-altering, really great advice. They're experiencing being sat down by an authority figure, and even if they're not in trouble, it's very reminiscent of being in trouble. It's very reminiscent of the kind of thing you want to get through, like that Monday morning meeting that's supposed to be the thing that makes the company really great, but it's actually just something that everyone, very perfunctory, that everyone just kind of gets through so that they can go do their real work. It's like you got to understand the art of communication is getting that this is the way a lot of times people respond to certain dynamics of communication, and saying, okay, given the reality that the things that I say to my child are basically filtered through a filter, which is, what do I have to do to get more of what I want? What do I have to do to get this conversation to end? What do I have to do to make them think that what are they wanting me to do? Because I know that the punchline for 85% of the things that my parent tells me is, get A's, take out the trash, don't have sex, don't do drugs, do this, that, the other. There's a functional behavioral outcome that we train our children to be watching for, and the longer it takes for you to get to that, it's like, and some people watch these videos and they say, what am I supposed to do? And very often people are kind of flummoxed because there is no specific doing. It's the way that you relate to your creative process. Becoming more sensitive to and engaged with this creative process very often is the takeaway. So at the end of these videos, people say, it'd be really nice if you tell me what I should do with this stuff. And well, what you should do with it is just kind of think about it and play with it and filter your experience through an awareness of some of the stuff that we're talking about. That's at least what we do, and that's what has created a lot of changes for us. And so when you really want to communicate something to a child, like for example, what's the basic tenet here? How you are perceiving and experiencing your school situation may be triggering within you physical symptoms that you don't want to have. That's the essence, right? But if you sit a kid down that's 5 years old or 10 years old, or someone that's 25 years old for that matter, and say, well, your perception and the experience that flows from that is informing aspects of your biology that's causing you to manifest these physical symptoms. The person's snoozing. They're like, and then you go to just tell them, okay, don't be bothered by school. Okay, well, that's great. What are they going to do about that? Getting into those components of specifically how to do that, how to perceive deliberately, literally how to change the picture of reality that you're presenting to your consciousness. And that's something that you don't really communicate in words to a child or to another person. That's something that you model for them by doing it yourself. That's something that you do in your own life first and foremost. But another thing is that when the child comes to you with complaints, or when the child seems unhappy or unreasonable or dissatisfied with something, the questions that you ask the child, not the direct, explicit communication. Well, the reason you're feeling that way is because you did this, that, the other thing. Probably that's just going to be frustrating because they're not going to know what you're talking about. But if you ask questions that imply things like the way in which they see it is really important for the experiences that they have, and that the quality of their experience is really important for a lot of things, that it matters how they feel, and that there are little playful ways that you can go inside. Did you know that you can go inside your head and play with different ways of thinking about the same thing and totally change the way it feels? Did you know that you could experience that differently? Isn't that nice? Did you know that even though you feel bad when you get what you don't want, did you know that you don't have to feel bad when you get what you don't want? There's actually ways to feel really good even when things like what you don't want happens, or when you don't get what you do want. And playing with it, and then I would even give an example. I could even draw pictures, and I would draw a picture that way. I would have them draw a picture of something that you didn't like that happened, and then the feeling and how you felt. And then I want you to draw that same picture again and draw a totally different feeling. Draw how you would like to have felt in that situation. If you could choose any feeling in the world that you could have felt with the same thing having happened, because so often we get into this mode of basically complaining that something happened one way, not the other way, and resisting it, and then attributing the fact that it happened one way, not the other, that we assume that we feel the way that we do because things happen in a certain way. But how interesting for a parent to set a child down and say, okay, listen, I know you're upset about this. Let's play a little game. Let's make this a game. It's playful. Maybe you could do this yourself. And if you really want your child to do it, you sit down and do it and say, hey, can I borrow your crayons for a minute? Okay, you go watch TV. I got to go do a project. And you sit down and start coloring. They're going to come over and ask you and be kind of cagey about it. You know, like, no, don't worry. This is grown-up magic stuff. This is grown-up mind magic. Don't bother with it. And so you draw a picture of something, the event that happened, or some way to represent it, and you draw how you actually felt. And you draw the same picture. You draw how you would like to have felt. And that just activates within the child. Don't segue into teaching. Don't teach them a process. Don't tell them this is a good thing to do. Just what's implied in this? What's implied in this is that there is a division between reality and our experience of it. And that although we often or always, or probably maybe always have, had one experience in response to one particular reality, it doesn't mean that we necessarily have to have that experience. Get their wheels turning. Get them interested in it. And don't do it when they're feeling bad. Don't, because then what they do is they associate this kind of mindset stuff with really bad feelings. Because every time it comes up, it's when they're already feeling really bad. You want to start doing this stuff when the child's in a very positive state, when they're feeling really good, when they're very curious, when they're very interested. That's the time to do it. And then when they're upset, you just kind of ask them questions that imply that the solution that they're looking for is in a direction perhaps that they're not looking. And that's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, and for the parents to have that awareness and to be working on it, that's when you were talking, I was like, yeah, that's perfect. Like, that's such a great exercise for you to talk about a situation you're dealing with. Because I grew up watching my parents deal with crappy situations all the time, and I learned to be really worried no matter what. And like the words that were taught to me was like, oh, God takes care of everything. God's in control. No, you don't need to worry. God's going to take care of it. Everything's fine. Everything's great. But I actively watched persistent and never-ending worry about everything. And so, like, though the explicit teaching to me was, don't worry, God's in control, the implicit teaching was, don't worry, God's in control, but you always need to worry about everything all the time.
It's to say, they take in everything. And I'm talking about literally, kids will model you, I remember, and this is the thing, we are so much more intuitive, we're so much more aware, we're so much more knowledgeable than we allow ourselves to be, and we are cultured out of as we get older because it's impolite, and people think you're weird if you know things you shouldn't, and if they can tell things about you that they shouldn't be able to. So we pretend like we don't know this stuff, but it sometimes still will bubble up. The child knows everything about what you are doing. They know what motivates you to do it. They know the perception you have of them that leads to you saying the things that you do. And so if you're motivated to say something nice to your child out of an awareness of something that you think is lacking in them or in their ability, they will pick up on it. You cannot con these kids because kids are the greatest bullshit artists in the world. You cannot bullshit a bullshitter, right? You cannot out-con the best cons there are. And the best cons there are the ones that rely on other people to take care of them, who need other people to take care of them for their survival, which is kids. They're intuitive, they're smart, they are in tune, and it is so important that not just and I see so many people, especially like really wonderful moms, like really like just lovely ladies who sacrifice their experience for their children, and they don't realize that they are transmitting sacrifice of their personal experience to the child's life pattern. The thing is that the child is picking up not just on what you do for them, not just on what you say to them, but on the experience. They are modeling everything. And this is how people wake up one day and say, oh my God, I'm my mother. I rebelled against everything she said. I rebelled against everything that she tried to teach me. And that is part of the script. That's part of the formula of becoming this individual. What you resist persists. And if we can get you thinking that you're the exact opposite of this woman, then all the essential elements of her experience can begin to manifest in your experience, and they'll be so ingrained by the time you know it that you'll be her. And that'll basically be, you'll be like your own kind of version of her. And just recognizing, so as a parent, when you're communicating to a child, and you're never not, recognize that the words that you say, that you go on long drives and you kind of wonder and worry and fret about, and you connive and contrive to get just the right words to make them feel just the right certain way, that whole time you're communicating to them, and you're communicating to them implicitly by how stressed out you are, by how worried you are, or by how happy you are for that matter, and that they're picking up on everything. And there's no way around, there's no shortcut to becoming a good parent. The only way to be a good parent really is to learn how to really improve what it's like to be you. And this is the thing, people will go to the ends of the earth for their children. They'll go to the end of the earth to make money. They'll go to the ends of the earth for all of these different things. But they're kind of a little bit lazy. And there's this one really wonderful quote is that there's no explaining mankind's indifference to himself or to herself. That we have just built within us this fundamental indifference to the quality of what it's like to be us. And it's really rather a tragic thing, because the quality of what it's like to be us really does set the upper limit for our ability to influence and affect positive change in the world, in the experience of other people, and all of this different stuff. And so that was really an interesting thing. So your parents said to you, don't worry, God's in control, basically, the Lord provides or whatever. Essentially, don't worry, be happy, right?
Yeah.
And with some like theological stuff tacked on. And then they worried about the stuff. And she, being this just unbridled perceptual master, saw the whole thing. You think you're fooling people. You're not. Especially kids. Like, who are you kidding? There's no way to be a successful happiness coach and to be unhappy. People see through it because it's about the energy. It's about that. Because literally, think about this. We have evolved to be able to read each other like a book. We've evolved to be able to see it. And if you haven't seen it in the past, it's because you've been taught to not see it, because someone probably really punished you or chastised you or shamed you and you saw something you shouldn't have seen. And so you've learned to pretend like you don't see the things that you do. And when you do that, the really dangerous thing is that you assume other people don't see the things that you're pretending not to see, and they see them, right? Your kids see them. They know what's going on. And so the only way to accomplish this stuff, I'm sorry to say, is to learn how to really enjoy the experience of what it's like to be you, and to really thrive in that. And the mechanisms and the means and the models and the thoughts and the beliefs and the coaching and the whatever that you do, the things you instill within yourself that allow you to improve what it's like to be you, you don't have to teach that stuff to your kids. They'll pick up on it because they model perfectly the lifestyles that they see as they're growing up. And it's not about, and that's the kind of the hilarious thing about religious tradition or, secular moral tradition or whatever, is that we think that we need to codify this stuff and pass it down as laws to kids. But really, the reason it doesn't work very well is because they're not really paying attention to those books anyway. They're paying attention to what you're doing with those books, how you're thinking, how you're feeling, how you're believing, what you do with belief, how you relate to information. Like the Bible's got some like really good feeling passages in it, and it's got some not so great passages in it. Some families tend to give a lot of emphasis to the really good feeling stuff, and you know what the kids tend to do? They tend to kind of do kind of a similar thing. Other families tend to kind of give attention to the more kind of unpleasant aspects, or the kind of things that are like, let's sort by necessity, let's sort by opportunity. People seem to look at the necessity stuff, or at the bad things that happen if you don't, versus the wonderful things that happen if you do. The kids pick up on that pattern of information processing, and they take it and they apply it in their relationships and their jobs. They apply it in areas that got nothing to do with theology whatsoever. That's the essential pattern level at which these things are communicated. And I think having a knowledge of that allows us to get away from that sensation that we have, that there's a little sneaky ego inside here who has certain intentions and certain perspectives and certain beliefs and certain feelings. Let me package that in a way that makes it palatable to this person that I'm talking to here. That is being communicated. If it's a part of what it's like to be you, you're communicating it to other people. You're communicating it to all that is. And when you recognize that, it's just like, well, shit, I'm double-minded here. There's nothing I can do but find a way to improve what it's like to be me. There's nothing I can do to feel better myself if I want this other person to feel better. There's no way that I can kind of like be a good parent without being a good individual. And being a good individual is all about being an individual who enjoys their experience of being an individual.
Yeah.
And when you recognize that, it's like everything falls into place. It really does.
Yeah, and when it comes to like just like familial conflict resolution, it should be something that's just talked about. It's like, okay, wow, this thing happened, and everybody feels it, and everybody knows it, and everyone knows this, whatever this, thing that happened. I mean, I remember my parents and my mom like having conflicts at work and stuff, and it was such a heated thing, and you could tell she was, it's actually really funny. I remember back to a gallbladder problem, and I was like, oh my gosh, I actually can remember the conflict that I'm almost certain, I'm not her, I don't know her perception, but like when you look at like the timing of these events and like this thing that happened, and then like a crazy thing with the gallbladder, and the conflict that gave rise to this adaptive mechanism in the body, it's so interesting. It was something that made her very angry, and so like these anger responses, and like talking about it. So if you got, if it's two parents, and if like if we had a kid and I'm having a conflict, it's like, okay, so here's this conflict, and we talk about it, and it's like I'm trying to process the way I'm interpreting this conflict. When it happened, this is how I saw it. I'd like to see it in a different way, because I am in tune with my physiology. I know my blood pressure went up. I know that I got really angry, and I know every time I go back to think about it, I feel those symptoms again. I can tell that I'm still active with this conflict, and I would like to overcome it, because I'm aware of the 5 biological laws, and I know that if I stay in this conflict activity, that my body is adapting, and it's recruiting tissue, and it's changing tissue in an effort to assist me in overcoming this conflict, because our bodies are, they were never meant to be in conflict for very long periods of time. It was always like a one-off thing, maybe a day max that you're running from a predator or whatever. But it's like, when we stay active in these conflicts day after day, and we think about it, then we get on the phone with our sister and we tell her all about it, and we relive the whole thing, and then we tell everybody about this problem. We're perpetuating it. We're perpetuating the feeling. We're reactivating, reliving it, and you are in that physiological state of adaptation. But when you're aware, and your whole family's aware, and it's kind of like, oh, we talk about this, it's like, what other ways could I see this? And even asking your kids, I feel like that's a beautiful thing. Who's got a better answer, a better solution, more pure and innocent, and just purely feel good than a child to say, hey, you know what, this thing happened. How, is there a way you think I could look at this that could help me feel better? I mean, I think that's a fun, wonderful, helpful, family activity when everyone is faced with these circumstances. Okay, well, I don't like going to school. Well, let's talk about going to school. Let's talk about, the teachers. Let's talk about the kids. Let's talk about our ability to respond to the kids and the parents and the homework and all of this stuff. How do we want to see it? And that there is flexibility in our perception, and it's not just the cold, hard facts of reality, but that's what we tell kids. These are the cold, hard facts of reality, and you got to deal with it.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I can remember, so let's go just to the conflict thing. If you had a conflict at work, and you're conflicted about feeling conflicted, which is to say something bad happened at work, I'm feeling really bad about that, and then I'm so caught up in my experience, then I remember, oh my God, I got a child at home, I'm upset right now, but I can't be upset right now because I don't want my child, so basically you start conflicting about being conflicted. You understand that you're modeling for that child that conflict is not okay, versus modeling for the child, well, if I'm feeling bad in some way, I know that feeling is coming, that experience is coming from the way I'm relating to the situation. It's not coming from the situation itself. That doesn't mean it's a crisis. It doesn't mean I need to beat myself up. It doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong. It means that my work is to look at the manner in which I'm relating to the situation, the manner in which I'm creating my experience of the situation by the meanings that I'm assigning to it, by all these different things, and to kind of tinker with it, basically, and to find a way of improving my experience to one that is better for what it is like to be me. And when you model that for the child then, when they have an unpleasant experience, they say, gosh, oh, I don't like this experience, and it's associated with the fact that so-and-so's at school, or that this teacher, or that, or whatever, but they recognize that there's that fundamental division between what is and your experience of what is, and that implies that there's just so much that you can do, and you find clever ways. You know about your relationship with your kids more than we do, and so it's just become aware of the patterns of communication that exist between you and your children, especially when problems come up, and notice how, if you're not really adept at this stuff yet, and you're not really used to thinking in these terms, and you're sort of lost in it, and you don't know, I don't know, I just talk to my kids the way I'm talking to them. Notice if there are any differences in the way that you talk to them when something bad's going on, when you're worried about something, or when they seem to be worried about something, than when things are just all pretty much normal, well, and good. Notice those differences, because there will be those shifts that go on, and try to find ways of subtly kind of pointing in the direction of this opportunity or this ability to improve one's experience of a current situation. Because that was the thing. I know when I was in school, my stepmom was, she took the perspective of, and I learned a lot of kind of my personality from her. And I remember her it was in a very kind of friendly way, and she thought she was doing me a big favor, and ultimately it's worked out beautifully. But at the time, it didn't really help me that much. She said, school just sucks, man. I'm sorry. It's just like shitty. It's just the way it is. And I remember taking like kind of some comfort in that, but it was kind of like, gosh, there wasn't a whole lot for me to do from there. It's like, oh, here's an adult who's like, oh, she's in on it too. She's cool. She's, she's being honest with me. She's not pretending that it's some way other than it is. So that makes me trust her even more. And she's just pretty much like, yeah, school sucks. That's just all there is to it. Sometimes you have to do things you don't have to do. And that was the operating system. That was the belief that I was operating on for a really long time. And it was better than feeling alone in that, but it also kind of cemented for me this belief that there's just some experience, some situations that are intrinsically not desirable, and that you're going to have a bad experience when that's the case. Over time, I began to kind of question that, and I began to say, gosh, I wonder if there are things that I haven't considered that are giving rise to this bad experience. Because one thing I started to notice was that all of the stuff I was complaining about, the people, the situations, the circumstances, I wasn't really complaining about the stuff itself. What I really didn't like was my experience. I didn't like how I felt when certain things happened, or when certain people were around, or when they talked to me in a certain way. And so I started to consider the possibility that there's a distinction between the facts of the matter, that this person is here, that I'm at this location, that I have this much money, that this is going on in my life, between the facts of the situation and my experience and my experience of them, my feelings about them. And that implied division was very powerful for me, because I started to look for ways of changing my experience without relying on the reality to change, without relying on the people to change. And since then, and you've maybe noticed this like in our videos and stuff, and in our communication, I know that this is fundamental to how we talk, and sometimes people have a hard time kind of following what we're talking about, specifically
Hopefully
because...
not you. Hopefully you get it.
Well, when like someone who's new to it, though, when we're talking about thinking about thought, or thinking about feeling, thinking about acting in ways that create acting and behaviors that you want, it's a different way of relating to your creative process. And the reason that it works so well is that it's different. It's because it's the answer to the solution. It's like the Einstein quote that the solution to a problem cannot come from the same level of thinking that gave rise to the problem in the first place. That you actually have to get into the fundamental fabric of the thought in order to really start changing what your experience is. And for a lot of people, when they ask me a question, they're wanting me to respond in their present model of reality. They want me to give a solution to the problem that their present model of reality is creating in their experience, but they want that solution to be phrased in terminology that is consistent with the present model. But my thing is, like, the problem is that your present model needs to be updated. And this is this whole thing, like I posted earlier today, because I answered someone's question today, and they basically complained about the way that I answered it. And the thing about that is, well, but you see, the fact that you're averse to this different way of thinking is, from my perspective, the source of the issue that you're requesting help for. And it's one of the, you have to be willing to play the game when people, it's one of the characteristics of people for whom nothing works. They want a way to win the game without having to play it, which is to say, they want a way to improve their creative process without having to do anything different in their creative process. Well, you're asking for something that's logically inconsistent there, and that block, no one does this deliberately, but we do this kind of unintentionally, because we're like, that's kind of tweaky in my brain to think about that like that. That's what happens.
I was the most resistant person to it, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I did not get this for so long, and like sometimes we're just like, Steve's talking, and I'm like, I understand the words he's saying, but like I just am not getting what he's trying to say. But it's because he was speaking and communicating at a level that was like, I wasn't operating there. And this is a beautiful thing. This is seriously such a beautiful gift to give your children. Well, one, to give it to yourself, because that's what matters most, is your individual experience, is this ability to like climb up this ladder, and like instead of being the experiencer just looking at the world, and like you feel like you are your feelings, like you feel like you are depressed, you feel like you are anxious, you feel, we that's what we say. I'm like, I'm anxious, I've stopped being Melissa and now I'm anxious, and like we identify with these feelings, and we teach our kids to identify with their feelings. And so they're one day they're this, and then they're this, and so they feel kind of like an identity crisis, like, who am I? Like, I feel different than when I'm at home, when I'm around these people. And so like we experience people as being very moody. But when you as a family, you first as an individual, but then with your family, you start talking, like your whole family starts communicating in a different way, because your family no longer identifies with emotions. You guys climb up the ladder, and then you're up here talking about experiences, and you're looking down and and you're like analyzing like the tape of the game, and it's like, okay, so see what they did there. And, at that point, I know that I assigned a meaning to, that girl snubbing me in the lunchroom, and I told myself that I wasn't good enough. Oh, but I'm aware of that now, and I see how I created that bad feeling based on what this other person did. And, in our family, we all believe that everyone's always doing the very best that they can at the time. And so you teach her to assume the best about that person, you know what I mean? That the person just behaved in the way that they were best able to behave. And so she doesn't feel bad about or mad at that person. She realizes that I'm going to assume the best for my benefit, because when I think it's for a bad reason, then I feel really bad. When I think it's because of, some way that I am, and this is something fundamentally bad about me. But like, do you see how cool this is? Like, when you're doing it, and then your kids are doing it, and we're communicating, and we're talking about experiences through this whole different paradigm, through this whole different lens, and we don't get sucked down into the details of like, oh, this, I'm just, wrought with emotion. I remember I was wrought with emotion for like years of my life. Like, my teenage years were wrought with emotion because I didn't have access to any other way of thinking about my thoughts, thinking about these situations. Like, I was just this, and that's, if your teenage kids had a different model, what would happen is they would still have the emotion, because you can't escape conflict shocks. You can't escape these unexpected things happening, because you don't know really how you'll respond in the moment until it happens, and then you respond. But this level of awareness, what happens is you're able to almost immediately, or like very soon thereafter, like you're able to climb up this ladder of awareness and look down at the situation. You're like, oh, I know why I responded in that way, and I'm aware that my tissue was adapting during that time. And so when you're aware of all of this, you're like, what's coming, what happened, why it happened, why you felt the way you did. I mean, I remember, I think it was in chiropractic school, taking like an emotional intelligence test, because like they got really into emotional intelligence and learning about, and it was something about like your awareness of your emotions and yourself and where they came from. Like, I feel like I think I scored very poorly on that, and this was at like 24 years old. I'm like, I don't even know where my emotions come from. And now, like, completely different from then. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, I know the recipe that I have for getting anxious, for getting worried, for creating these negative emotions in myself. And so when everybody is aware of their own personal recipe, and everyone is taking personal responsibility for how they feel, and there's no blame game of like, you made me feel this way. I mean, there was so much like blaming, because nobody wants to get, caught with the hot potato of like, oh, it's actually your fault. But no, it's not my fault, it's their fault. No, it's not my fault. And so when you are taking responsibility for how you see the world, for the meanings you assign, for your interpretation, for how you end up feeling, it is a completely different experience. And these conflicts that happen don't last long, and you're able to resolve them in a very timely manner, because everybody is like open, communicative, like you're able to help your kids, they're able to help you, and it's just like such a cool thing to do.
Yeah, I think one of the big things too in communication with everyone, and this is how to bring in the detachment part. How can I, as a parent, if I'm a parent, how can I talk to my child in a way that somewhat neutralizes that kind of inherent friction that arises at a certain point between the communication between parent and child? And I think that the way that you do that is that you really assume that individual communication perspective and standpoint, that you really stop communicating to the child as if parent-child is the only element of your relationship. It's an important element. It's a natural. It's a lovely. It's an intrinsic element. But there's a more fundamental element at this point, and it's individual to individual. I mean, that truly is, because you can't be a parent or a child unless you're an individual. And so that's just an inherent. Before I'm my father's son, my mother's son, I'm just a person. I'm an individual. And before I'm a male, I'm an individual. Before I'm a coach or whatever, I'm an individual. And so that's the most intrinsic part. And so if someone will speak to me in a way that speaks to me as an individual, or that resonates with me as an individual, it doesn't matter if I'm conservative or if I'm liberal or if I'm this or that or the other thing. If it resonates with me at an individual, it resonates at that deepest level. And if my parent says something to me, if I don't have a good relationship with my parent, but they say something to me that resonates at an individual level, it's going to be null, right? The fact that I don't have a good relationship with them. I can't unring the bell of resonance, right, when they said that thing. And so when you speak to your kids, the extent to which you can really just that you can recognize that they're this unpredictable kind of black box of spontaneity, that they're this surprise that you got when you push the surprise button, and recognizing that you as a parent to child, have all these hopes and dreams and fears and all this stuff, and that's an okay part of you. It's an acceptable part of you. It's an important part. It's a critical part of you. But it's not all that there is to your relationship. That there's also this wonderful individual-to-individual relationship that a lot of parent-children never explore and never get to enjoy. And that's, listen, I let the cat out of the bag, and the cat's out of the bag now, and that's you. I conceived you, and I've got no idea what you're going to do. I've got no idea if I'm going to like it. I've got no idea if it's going to turn out well for you. I've got no idea if you're going to like it. But you know what? Whatever happens, there's a perfection to that process, and it's kind of scary, and that's kind of part of the perfection of the process. I don't know what's going to happen, and that scares me sometimes, but I know that if I did know everything that was going to happen, it would totally take the life and the zest and the spark of capacity for love that I have for you and for everything about our relationship away. So I don't wish it were other than it was. I don't know the impact that saying the things that I say to you are going to have on you and the quality of your experience, but I want to see what's going to happen. I want to have a kind of relationship where I say the things that make the most sense to me in the moment, and I accept the fact that I have the best that I can and not better, and I just want to offer those things to you and allow you to really make of them what you will. And this isn't necessarily a conversation you got to have with the child, but it's an emotional posture, it's a vibrational posture. You feel it. Like, I know, like, when I was growing up, for the first part of my experience of life, I mean, I'm talking about from like 0 to 3 to 4, 5, 6, 7 even, my parents interacted with me on the basis of individual to individual. I mean, I was treated as an individual. I wasn't treated as a child at all. And for that reason, I had very little experience being treated like a child. Then all of a sudden, when I turned about 7, my dad started going to church and started, you go to da-da-da-da, and he can't watch those movies and he can't do these things because he's too young for that. And he started behaving that way, and I was like, what the fuck are you doing? What? Excuse me. I was really, because it was so phony to me, because I had been treated as an individual my whole life, and now that I'm older than I've ever been, all of a sudden you're treating me like a child. And I remember being kind of, it was unreconcilable. And I still can't have a parent-child relationship, really, because I've got an individual relationship with them, and that is cool and it's good. But when people try to assume that, kind of parochial, parental, kind of like authoritarian, this, that, the other thing, it's just something about it seems so flimsy and fake, The real juice, the real essence, the real good stuff in your relationships with your children will be those individual relationships. Why is it when kids are often 40 or whatever, that they all of a sudden kind of come back around to having a wonderful relationship with their parents? It's because they start relating to each other as individuals. It's not a parent-child, rehearsed, scripty, jargon crap. It's just individuals. Now, relationship between, an individual that's a parent, they can manifest in beautifully traditional ways. The father taking the son to the baseball game, or taking his daughter to the baseball game, or the mother's love for it can be really wonderful and a real enrichment to the individual experience. But I think it helps so much for the individuals, especially for the parent, to understand. We're going to play a little game called I'm your mom and you're my son. I'm the boss and you're the listener. I'm the pastor of wisdom and you're the learner. But at the most basic level, we're individuals, right? And that, at the end of the day, is what this thing is all about. And the reason that I love you so much is you enrich my experience. And the reason that, the best thing that I can do for you is to have a wonderful experience myself, to model for you the importance of creating in your own life a really wonderful experience of what it's like to be you. And there's just a sincerity, there's an authenticity, there's a realness to that is just more, the relationship between individuals that can develop in the context of a parent-child arrangement is just so much deeper and more real than the father-son relationship, or the mother-daughter relationship, or the mother-son or the father-daughter relationship. Like the people who have that really wonderful family dynamic, I really think, and I've watched a lot of these different people, I think it is to the extent that they relate to each other as individuals, and that's first, and parent-child is second. And then, whatever else beyond that is similar careers or whatever. But that things are in the line of importance, because this is the thing, you think you've got to be something other than you are to be a good parent, especially if you're a young parent. But I mean, everybody thinks that there's aspects of themselves they've got to hide from their kids, or there's things that they're not inclined to do that they got to force themselves to do. And so you get yourself into these patterns of doing all of this stuff, not based on your judgment or on your feeling or on your intuition, but based on some kind of external, rigid, dogmatic, scripted, sort of like something you learned from someone else or read somewhere it's really important, or, you got to do this or your kid's going to end up being a vandal or something, and that's when you start behaving in ways that don't, you start behaving in ways that don't really, what they are, you lack integrity, and that you're not an integrated person, because there's who you really are and there's who you think you need to pretend to be to benefit your children.
It's all, inauthenticity, big
and it
time.
never comes off quite right.
Yeah.
And recognizing that, I think the relationship between you and you, which is to say your relationship to yourself as an individual, is hugely important, and recognizing that is the prevailing and the predominant force of interaction between you and your children, whether it's acknowledged or not. And that if it's not, to the degree that it's not acknowledged, it's even more powerful. That's absolutely true, because this implicit stuff that's so strong. It's the context stuff. This is the shit that people go to therapy and kind of gets drawn out, and they say, God, it's kind of hard to put it this way, but I think if I had to say it, there was always this strange dynamic between my mother and my, and that's what they're getting at. They're getting at this contextual stuff, this unconscious foundation, this unconscious iceberg right beneath the water, the very tip of which is our kind of conscious experience. I love you, Dad. I love you too. It's kind of like there's all this stuff under the water, though, these individual kind of dynamics that are going on. And I just love the transparency that's there. I love the capacity for what's really true intimacy, true, real intimacy between parent and child that exists when it's like, nominally, I'm the boss. Nominally, I'm in control. To some degree or another, I have some life experience that might be of use to you, but I don't know how it's going to be of use to you. And the wisdom that I pass on to you might benefit you by giving you something to rebel against. And if that's the role that it plays, that's fine. If I teach my kid this stuff, if I ever have a child and then they go off and they become a rigid dogmatist, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to say, well, I knew I wanted to tell you this stuff because I wanted to see what you would do with it when I did. Not so that you could then go off and be a clone of me, because I've been done before. You have never been done before. And so whatever you make of the wisdom that I give to you, I'm very pleased about that. It's, it's kind of like, it's nothing wrong either. Like, let's say that you raise your child with traditionally Christian values, and then the child goes off and let's say they're liberal, let's say, that they live a lifestyle that you don't approve of. Maybe they're gay, I don't know. Maybe, and you feel like maybe you've been a failure, or you've let them down, or you feel bad about that if you're like an Orthodox kind of background. My thing about that is that it was perfect, because maybe it was the contrast that allowed them to clarify for themselves, to get to know themselves. It's like we talked about yesterday, the definition of a successful relationship is not the one that goes on forever and ever. It's the one that maximally enriches the life experience of the people who are in it. I think that the purpose of transmitting these implicit values is not so that you listen to everything that I'm saying and say, married at 20, at 18, children at 20, retired at this age, this, that, the other thing. I'm going to present you with what I think is true to provide you with a stimulus of thought. And you're going to take that and do with it what you will. And what you do with it will be wonderful, right? Because it will be an expression of you. And I don't want you to be like me. I want you to be like you are in response to everything about what you've encountered in your life, including having me as a parent. And when you do that, that's kind of the bond. That's the difference. The bond.
Well, it's like it's just the honesty. Like that's the reality. And so, but people want to pretend it's something different, and you want, like, oh, you set up this relationship to be a huge disappointment when you expect this individual to just conform to what it is that you want them to do. And when you're so unaware of your own behavior, you're so unaware of like where your emotions come from, that you don't even know all of the things that you've implied to them over the years, and you don't even know how that's affected them as an individual, and then the things that they'll get exposed to, and then you expect them to still conform to this ideal that you had in your mind because your child needs to behave in this particular way. I just think that there's so much, and it starts with you and you. It starts with you figuring this stuff out for yourself, you being aware of your internal state, you being aware of your emotions, of your responses, you resolving the conflicts that you've had in your life, and then you can model it for the kids, like get yourself right. Hopefully your spouse is on board with that, but even if they're not, it's all about you and what you're modeling and what you're expressing and how you're feeling, like how you feel matters so much more than what you tell your kids. It matters so much more. If they watch you just like do your duty as a mother or a father and work so hard and never enjoy your life because you got to take care of the kids, because, oh, well, I had these kids, you got to take care of them. You're showing your kids how to do exactly that, even if you don't feel like you would maybe have done things a little differently. You're like, oh, if I didn't have this many kids so early, I maybe wouldn't have to work so much and I'd be able to spend more time with you. You know what I mean? Like, even if a parent feels like they would have done something differently, it still is like, start with you. Model for the kids how you'd like them to live, confidently, and loving themselves and really feeling good all of the time, and showing them how to do that is the most valuable thing you'll ever do.
And I think, you gave that specific example there. I think that one of the most chronic things that's modeled for children is this pattern of belief that there's something basic about me that's wrong that needs to be fixed and changed. And when that pattern is there, do you know what my problem is? That kind of thing. I'm trying to figure out what my thing is. Maybe I know what it is and I'm battling with it my whole life. That's a pattern of relationship to self. And you transfer that template to your children, and they learn it from you. And it's one of those things that it's like, that's not something to feel bad about, because everyone's responsible for their own life experience. And so, like, you're responsible for the fact that you got what you got. They'll be responsible for the fact they're getting what they're getting, and it's their opportunity. It's just more contrast for them. It's more opportunity for them to clarify really what they want. But when you recognize the fact that, people will say, so-and-so's nothing like their parents, very often the content, the specific manifestation of life isn't the same, but the pattern will be very similar. John feels like he never does enough, I don't know, at work or something like that. And then this other, then his son feels like he's not good enough because of this, that, the other thing, because he can't relax enough, or I don't know, he doesn't, but it'll be the same basic pattern, is that I'm X amount of distance away from where I really want to be, or where I really should be, and it's because of this particular thing that's wrong with me, but I just can't seem to get a fix for that. That will then transfer on, and you'll look at their lives and they won't look the same, but the experience is very much the same. That's that thing. Manifestation occurs at the level of experience. The transfer of these kind of like these lineages that we pass on, the inheritance that we really give to our children, it's an experiential thing. Things harmonize at the level of experience. Someone likes sports and someone doesn't, but their internal experience of liking and not liking be very similar. They're, whatever it is, whether it's self-appreciation or self-loathing, whether it's feeling abundant and really happy, or whether it's experiencing scarcity and feeling unworthy, that stuff gets passed on. And we look at them and we think, they're quite different. But if you could look inside, you would see that the experiences are modeled almost perfectly. So, be a better parent really is all about improving what it's like to be you. It's about self-acceptance of where you are right now. So if what it's like to be you is not that great, and then you go and feel bad about that, well, that's just perpetuating the model of feeling bad about the fact that you are where you are at a given moment in time. But if you'll just look at the whole situation and say, okay, given this what is wanted, then your children will, starting from wherever they are right now, it doesn't matter if they're grown already, they will have the life experience reference point of looking at their parents and saying, gosh, at some point or another, my mom just started asking, what did she want? It didn't matter what happened. She just always asked, what did she want? And you know what? I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but I have actually picked up on that, and it's been so useful for me too. And it is just about being very kind of subtle and easy about this stuff, and taking the pressure off. Taking the pressure off and just kind of allowing this thing to unfold in its own way, at its own pace. And I mean, it's a recognition and an experience, I think, that all is well. Yeah. And realizing that recognition is just a skill, and that if you don't recognize it right now, then it's just something to play with. It's playful. All of this stuff, playfulness is a key that unlocks things seriousness will not, and striving will not, and forcing will not, and worrying will not. It is being willing to be playful about those things that are most precious to us in our life. Tremendously important, and it's so scary to do that, because I love my kids so much, I love my wife so much, I love my job is so important to me, but my health really matters, and you want me to be playful about it. Well, I'm suggesting to you that being playful about it might allow more of what you want and less of what you don't. And kind of giving you an opportunity or an invitation to experiment with playfulness, because seriousness maybe isn't working so well for you. But it's a leap of faith, and it's let me see what happens when I stop forcing this thing and I start playing with it. Let me see what happens when I start trusting a process that I have no choice to trust, because I have nothing else but this process. And yeah, it's just edging in there by degrees. You know what I'm saying? Just let this make as much sense to you as it does right now, and accept that and play with it, and kind of experiment with it, and think about thoughts in new ways, and think about actions and behaviors and creation in new ways, and you will begin to manifest an understanding of this stuff that will be just perfectly calibrated for improving what it's like to be you.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good one.